Here's your rewritten script, cleaned up for general audience guidelines, with all host and channel references removed, presented as a single continuous paragraph. There's a very specific time printed on millions of seniors' internal clocks, and that time is 3 in the morning, not 2, not 4, but 3. And if this keeps happening to you, you've probably already asked a doctor about it and been told something like, that's just part of agging. Or you've searched for it online and found the same 5 tips recycled over and over again. But today it's worth going somewhere different with this conversation. Because after years of working with seniors on sleep concerns, it becomes clear that waking up at 3 a.m. is rarely random. It is not meaningless. And in many cases, the real reason has nothing to do with what most people assume. And one of the 7 things covered today, the one saved for last, involves something that happens inside the body every single night that almost nobody talks about. Something invisible, something that rarely comes up in a standard doctor's visit. And once you hear it, it may completely change the way you think about your sleep. So it's worth staying through the whole explanation, because skipping ahead risks missing the piece that may matter most. And before diving in, take a moment to think about what it actually feels like to wake up at that hour. Is it a sudden jolt? Is it heat in the chest? A wave of anxiety for no clear reason? Or does the body just snap fully alert as if someone flipped a switch? It's worth holding on to that feeling. Because by the end of this explanation, it should be much clearer what the body was trying to communicate. And the goal here is simply to give people over 60 real, clear, honest information about what's happening inside their bodies. Not vague reassurances, not complicated jargon, just the truth explained in a way that actually helps. And today the focus is on one of the most common complaints heard from adults over 60, waking up at the same time every night. Usually somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, and here's what gets covered: 7 specific reasons the body keeps pulling people out of sleep at that hour. And for each one, what's happening physically, why it tends to hit harder after 60, what it feels like from the inside, and most importantly, what can actually be done about it. Starting with reason 7, the body's internal organ clock sending a signal, something rarely discussed in mainstream medical conversations. And yet the underlying science is fairly well established. The body doesn't run on one single clock, it runs on many clocks. Every major organ has its own rhythm, its own peak hours of activity. The heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the digestive system, they all follow a schedule. And according to both traditional health frameworks and modern chronobiology research, the liver tends to be most biochemically active in the early hours of the morning, roughly between 1 and 3 a.m., which is when it works hardest on its overnight tasks, filtering the blood, processing metabolic byproducts, and breaking down substances consumed during the day. And here's where this becomes especially relevant for older adults. As the body ages, the liver's efficiency tends to decline. It processes things more slowly. And if the liver is working extra hard at night because it's dealing with a heavy evening meal, alcohol, certain medications, or a buildup of metabolic waste, that added workload can create a subtle but real stress response inside the body, one that triggers a light hormonal shift, and that shift can be just enough to pull someone out of sleep right in that 2 to 3 a.m. window. And one helpful way to picture this is imagining the body as a small city, with the liver acting as the overnight sanitation crew, quiet during the day, but starting to roll out around 1 a.m. And even though the activity isn't loud, its presence alone can disturb the neighborhood. So practical steps here include finishing the evening meal at least a few hours before bed when possible, keeping that meal lighter, especially in fat and protein, since both require significant liver processing. Avoiding alcohol in the hours before sleep, since even small amounts add to the liver's overnight workload. And for anyone on multiple medications, it's worth asking a doctor whether any of them are processed by the liver, since the timing of those doses can matter more than most people realize. Moving to reason 6, a mineral the brain needs at night that's often depleted, specifically magnesium, one of the most important minerals in the human body, involved in hundreds of biochemical processes and playing a very specific role in sleep, helping regulate the nervous system, supporting melatonin production, and activating the brain receptors that promote deep, restorative rest. And the challenge here is that research consistently shows magnesium levels tend to drop with age. Older adults absorb less of it from food, excrete more of it through the kidneys, and many common medications, including certain diuretics, antacids, and acid-reducing medications, can deplete it further. And when magnesium levels run low, the nervous system becomes more reactive. Small stimuli that normally wouldn't cause any disruption, a slight temperature shift, a dream, a faint sound, can suddenly cause a full jolt awake. And once awake, the brain struggles to power back down because it's missing the very mineral that helps signal calm. And there's a case worth mentioning of a woman in her early 70s, sharp and active, who had been waking at 3 a.m. for nearly 2 years, assuming it was simply anxiety. And it wasn't until her magnesium levels were checked that they turned out to be on the low end of normal. And after speaking with her doctor and starting a magnesium glycinate supplement under medical guidance, she reported sleeping through the night within a few weeks. And it's worth being clear that magnesium supplementation should never begin without first speaking to a doctor, especially for anyone with kidney concerns. But it can be worth asking specifically about magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate, as those forms tend to be gentler and better absorbed. And in terms of food sources, dark leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, almonds, and black beans are all excellent natural options. Though magnesium is only part of a larger picture, since the next reason involves something the body does every night during sleep that most people have never even heard of, and may be one of the most underappreciated causes of early morning waking in seniors. Reason 5 involves core body temperature dropping too quickly and the brain reacting to that shift, because sleep and body temperature are far more connected than most people realize. To fall asleep, core body temperature needs to drop, and that drop is actually what triggers the brain to transition into sleep mode. And throughout the night, temperature continues to follow a fairly precise pattern, a slow decline into the early morning hours, followed by a gradual rise that begins preparing the body for waking. And in healthy younger adults, this temperature curve tends to be smooth and predictable. But after 60, that system can become less precise, and two things in particular can go wrong. First, the temperature drop can happen too quickly early in the night, which sounds like it would help with sleep, but can actually disrupt sleep architecture and make the lighter stages of sleep in the second half of the night more fragile. And second, the early morning temperature rise that's supposed to help someone wake up naturally around 6 or 7 a.m. can shift earlier, so instead of beginning around 5 a.m., it starts at 2:30 or 3. And when core temperature begins climbing that early, the brain interprets it as a signal that it's time to wake up. And this effect can be made noticeably worse by a bedroom that's too warm, which many older adults keep warmer than ideal out of concern about feeling cold at night. But a bedroom that's too warm actually works against the body's natural overnight cooling process, and can push someone into lighter sleep exactly when they should be in their deepest rest. And one helpful comparison here is thinking of sleep like a slow cooking process, where the right temperature produces the intended result. But too much heat disrupts the whole cycle and things finish too early, and research consistently suggests a bedroom temperature somewhere between 65 and 68 degrees F, or roughly 18 to 20 degrees C, tends to be ideal for sleep in older adults. And for anyone who finds that sounds too cold, trying it for a week with a warm blanket and lighter pajamas rather than a heated room often reveals a noticeable difference. Continuing into reason 4, the idea that the gut is communicating with the brain, and that conversation tends to happen right around 3 a.m., which surprises a lot of people. But the underlying science here is growing quickly. Most people have at least heard of the gut-brain connection, and researchers now understand that the gut and brain stay in constant communication through what's called the gut-brain axis, a two-way information highway involving the vagus nerve, the immune system, and billions of nerve cells lining the digestive tract. And what fewer people realize is that this communication doesn't stop during sleep. In fact, gut activity follows its own circadian rhythm, and parts of it peak during nighttime hours. And when the gut microbiome, the community of bacteria living in the digestive tract, falls out of balance, it can generate inflammatory signals that travel directly to the brain along that same pathway. And research over the past decade has linked imbalances in gut bacteria to disrupted sleep cycles, increased nighttime waking, and reduced time spent in deep sleep. And here's the connection to older adults specifically. The gut microbiome tends to become less diverse with age, and antibiotic use, dietary changes, reduced physical activity, and certain medications, particularly acid reducers, can all shift the composition of gut bacteria in ways that disrupt that nighttime gut-brain communication. And the result is an increase in low-grade biological noise at night, with the brain receiving slightly irregular signals from the gut during the exact window, roughly 2 to 4 a.m., when sleep is naturally at its lightest. And one simple way to think about it is imagining the gut sending a message to the brain at 3 a.m. that something feels slightly off. And even though that message may not be urgent, the brain, already in a lighter stage of sleep, still picks it up and responds by waking. And practical steps here include eating a wider variety of fiber sources, different vegetables, legumes, and whole grains that help feed beneficial gut bacteria, incorporating fermented foods like plain yogurt, kefir, or kimchi to help reintroduce beneficial bacterial strains, and avoiding large meals and high-sugar foods in the evening, since both increase fermentation activity in the gut during sleep. And this is an area where even small dietary adjustments, sustained over several weeks, can produce a measurable difference. Moving into reason 3, a quieter hormonal shift that may never have been connected to sleep at all, specifically involving the thyroid gland and what it does at night. Since the thyroid produces hormones that regulate metabolism, the body's energy production and consumption, and like nearly everything else in the body, this system follows its own circadian rhythm, with thyroid-stimulating hormone tending to peak in the late evening and early morning hours as the body prepares for the metabolic demands of the coming day. and in people with a smoothly functioning thyroid system, this peak typically goes completely unnoticed, but a significant number of older adults have some degree of subclinical thyroid imbalance, meaning their levels fall technically within a normal range but aren't optimally balanced, and in those cases, that early morning hormone surge can become more pronounced, and when thyroid hormone activity spikes at the wrong time, even subtly, it can raise resting heart rate, increase internal body temperature, and create a vague sense of agitation or alertness right around 3 a.m. And at the same time, adrenal hormones, particularly cortisol and adrenaline, interact closely with thyroid function, so if the adrenal system has been under chronic stress, both systems can fall out of sync in a way that produces that wide-awake, heart-racing, mind-spinning feeling in the early morning hours. And there's a case worth mentioning of a man in his late 60s who had been waking up between 3 and 4 a.m. for over a year, whose standard blood work always came back within normal limits, but when he specifically requested a fuller thyroid panel, including T3 and reverse T3 rather than just the standard TSH test, a pattern consistent with subclinical thyroid dysregulation was identified, and after adjustments to his treatment, his early morning waking resolved almost entirely within about 2 months. So for anyone waking at 3 a.m., especially alongside a racing heart, in a heat, or a restless, anxious feeling that's hard to explain, it may be worth requesting a complete thyroid evaluation rather than just the standard screening test, since a standard test alone can miss important patterns in older adults. Continuing to reason 2, the possibility of a medication schedule conflict that often goes completely unaddressed, and this one deserves direct attention because it's common, fixable, and rarely discussed. Many seniors take multiple medications prescribed for entirely valid reasons, but the specific timing of those medications relative to the sleep cycle can have a significant and completely unintended impact on when someone wakes at night. And to give a few examples, certain beta blockers, commonly prescribed for heart conditions and blood pressure, are known to suppress melatonin production, and when taken in the evening, they can directly interfere with the brain's ability to stay in deep sleep through the early morning hours. Certain antidepressants, particularly SSRIs taken in the morning, reach their peak metabolic activity in the afternoon and evening, which can create a mildly stimulating effect exactly when the brain should be winding down. Diuretics taken in the afternoon or evening do exactly what one would expect, increasing the urge to urinate during the exact window when sleep should be at its deepest. And certain blood pressure medications can cause blood pressure to dip too low in the early morning hours, triggering a compensatory stress response, essentially a small internal alarm that causes waking around 3 a.m. So a helpful step here is making a list of every medication taken, including the time of day each one is taken, and then reviewing that list with a doctor or pharmacist, ideally both, and asking one specific question: whether the timing of any of these medications could be contributing to early morning waking, not whether the medication itself is appropriate. Just the timing, and in many cases, simply shifting a dose by a few hours can meaningfully change how the night unfolds. Without any new prescriptions or major changes, just adjusted timing, something that's often one of the first things overlooked entirely. And finally, reason 1, something happening in the bedroom itself that can't easily be seen, yet quietly undermines sleep every night. And this is the one worth spending a little extra time on because it surprises almost everyone, since so much attention tends to go toward what happens before bed. What's eaten, what's had to drink, how the evening winds down, and all of that does matter, but very few people think about the bedroom environment itself during sleep. Specifically what's happening in that room while lying in it, starting with light, and not the obvious bright light of a television or lamp, but something far subtler. The standby light on a television, the glow of a cable box, an LED on a power strip, the glowing numbers on a digital clock across the room. And research published in peer-reviewed sleep journals has found that even low-level ambient light barely registered on a conscious level, and disrupt melatonin production and increase the likelihood of waking during the later stages of the night, since the eyes, even closed, contain specialized cells that detect light and signal the brain regardless of whether the eyelids are shut. And at 3 a.m. during the lightest stage of sleep, that signal alone can be enough to tip someone from light sleep into full wakefulness. And beyond light there's sound, not loud sound, but subtle, irregular sound, a refrigerator compressor cycling on and off, a car passing in the distance, a house settling, a shift in a partner's breathing pattern, and the brain during the second half of the night is in an especially sensitive state, closer to the surface of consciousness, so irregular low-level sounds during this window can catch it off guard and pull it fully awake. And one useful way to think about this is imagining the sleeping brain as a very light sleeper in an apartment, someone who isn't bothered by noise, light, or activity during the day because they're busy and alert. But at 3 a.m., the quietest moment of the night, every drip, hum, or flicker becomes amplified. So the bedroom should ideally function as close to a sensory blank space as possible, dark, cool, quiet, with electronics minimized. and the easiest starting point tonight is covering or switching off every LED and standby light in the bedroom, using dark tape over ones that can't be turned off. Moving a phone to the far side of the room, and closing the door if household noise is a factor, since small changes like these matter most because sleep is at its most fragile in the second half of the night, and fragile things need protection rather than more exposure. Pulling this all together, waking up at 3 a.m. is not random. It is not simply agging, it is a signal, and 7 possible sources of that signal have been laid out here. The liver's peak activity hour potentially overwhelming its capacity, with evening dietary adjustments able to reduce that burden, magnesium depletion making the nervous system more reactive at night, something both testable and addressable with medical guidance. Shifts in core body temperature regulation that a bedroom environment may be intensifying, ongoing gut-brain communication, where an imbalanced microbiome may be sending disruptive signals during the lightest stage of sleep, a subtle thyroid or adrenal imbalance potentially generating an internal hormonal alarm at the wrong time, something a fuller panel may reveal that a standard test misses. Medication timing that may be creating completely fixable sleep disruptions without needing to change the medications themselves. And finally, the bedroom environment itself, specifically ambient light, irregular sound, and nearby electronics, potentially compromising the most fragile stage of sleep every single night. And in most cases, it isn't just one of these factors alone, but 2 or 3 layered together. And the encouraging part is that identifying even 1 or 2 and addressing them can meaningfully shift sleep quality, without requiring expensive equipment, surgery, or a dramatic lifestyle overhaul, just awareness and the willingness to apply it. And one of the most common things heard from older adults who finally start sleeping through the night again isn't simply, "I feel rested." It's something bigger, a sense of feeling like themselves again, because sleep isn't separate from the rest of life. It's the foundation everything else is built on: memory, mood, balance, immune health, and the ability to stay engaged with the people who matter most. And when sleep improves, so much else tends to improve alongside it. And it's worth remembering that no one is too old to reclaim their nights, too old to wake up feeling clear, rested, and ready. And for many people, one of these 7 explanations may be exactly the answer their body has been waiting for them to find. Though all of this information is intended for educational purposes only and isn't meant as medical advice, and anyone considering changes to diet, supplements, or medication timing should consult their physician or a qualified healthcare provider first. And a reasonable place to start tonight might be choosing just one thing: covering the LED lights in the bedroom, asking a doctor about magnesium levels, or shifting the evening meal a little earlier, giving it a week. And paying attention to what changes.